Hi guys, Rob at the Legacy Den here. Welcome to episode 2. Our theme for this episode is foils, pack prices, and expeditions inventions in Japan. So as a side note, I did get a new microphone, so the sound should be much clearer. Unfortunately, the guy above me does play the guitar, so if there's an annoying background sound, I apologize for that. Anyways, let's get started. So first, the foils. So foils are not unusually priced in this country. Generally, they reflect the demand of the card. So some people think, when you come to Japan, you should go and pick up some Japanese foils for cheap, I've heard people say. But actually, the Japanese stores here know that the foil multiplier for high demand cards is higher than it is for English cards. Similar to the US, the demand for standard foils is pretty low overall, but eternal playable foils, especially in Japanese, can be pretty crazy. So let's look at the newly released Fatal Push, only a couple weeks old. One store is posting their price on Twitter for the Japanese foil, and it's priced at 8,000 yen. So that store is Project Core, and it's not like they always price things high either. I mean, they have Soul Rings priced at 50 yen each, which is about 50 cents each, and Reliquary Towers for a dime. But Japanese foils really do carry that kind of premium, but only if the card is constructed format playable. I don't think there's much of a difference between a bulk foil rare in English and the same bulk rare in Japanese. There's zero demand, so there's no reason for them to artificially increase the price on it. And also, as a note, of course, you can find some Japanese foils here for cheaper than you would find the English foils in the States. Again, it's the same legacy staples. I found foil Door of Destinies for 250 yen, like $2.50. I got a foil Asceticism from Scars of Mirrodin for about $5. And that's less than the buy list price of the regular card in English in the States. So there are, of course, exceptions to the rule of, high value cards are more in Japanese. Many stores here tend not to use the computer system. So only one store in Denden Town, Big Magic, has iPads for people to order cards. They have about 6 or 7 on their counters that you can order from. The rest of the stores tend to have their cards in a showcase, or they carry them in binders with stickers on the price of the cards. They're manually changed every time. So because of this, each store generally has their foil section out in the open in cases. So they don't usually have them hidden, or they don't usually have the foil stock on computers or anything. Generally, it's really noticeable when they have a Japanese foil and English foil of the same card side by side. You can see the price difference on some of the cards. The Japanese one is almost always priced higher. Sometimes they're priced similar or the same, but it's rare that the Japanese foil of a high demand card is priced at less than the English foil. And these prices can also get pretty crazy when it's already a very high demand foil, like a Tarmogoyf or a World Wake Jace the Mind Sculptor. So, let's get back to that Japanese foil Fatal Push. It's especially rare for a card in a standard pack to be worth, $80, much less an uncommon. So, getting a single uncommon that's not an invention or expedition from a pack is pretty rare in a standard set. That's what I would consider master set level value. So you would think that packs in Japan would be more expensive due to how expensive the foils can be. The same store that might have the Japanese Fatal Push for 8,000 yen might carry the English one for only 5,000 yen. That's how big of a difference the multiplier can be. So, actually, it's the opposite of the pricing for packs. Prices are actually cheaper for packs in Japan for standard sets. So they're about $3 each at most stores for a standard set single pack of the new set. I don't really know why they're so much lower than MSRP, but it's good for the players who like to buy in small quantities. My guess for why it's cheaper is because they have a lot of other card games, and they're all priced at about $3 a pack for their cards, even when the MSRP is a little higher on those. Obviously, cards with lower MSRPs have lower prices overall. Like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not $3 a pack. I think it's probably $1.50 or something. The trade-off to having these low prices on single packs, however, is that the price for a box of a standard set at stores isn't really any cheaper than just buying 36 individual packs. Some places might sell boxes for a little cheaper than if you bought 36 packs, but not by much, maybe only a few dollars. So for new standard packs, both Japanese and English tend to actually be the same price. So if you're used to buying English packs for $4 each, you can actually come to Japan, buy English packs for 300 yen, which is $3. And if you take exchange rate into account, it's even cheaper for you. So just something to keep in mind. So some people have this question: if the price of the packs is the same in English and Japanese, and Japanese foils are worth more, shouldn't you just buy Japanese packs? What's the downside to just buying Japanese packs all the time? Okay, yes, foils in Japanese are worth more, but to me, the downside is actually demand. Even if I open a Japanese Aether Revolt pack and get, let's say I get really lucky and get a Japanese foil Tezzeret, it's not like there's a huge demand for a Japanese foil copy of it. And if I open a regular Japanese Tezzeret, there's even less demand. If I don't use it or I don't trade it to one of my friends, because you can't really trade in stores here, I have to rely on the buy list prices of stores here, because stores like Channel Fireball or Card Kingdom won't buy non-English cards. And that's fine if you're Japanese and you just play standard and you don't deal with cards online. But for someone like me, the English version is just more convenient. I can trade it easier with people who want it for EDH, because you trade more in the States than you do in Japan, or at GPs. I can ship it to Channel Fireball or Card Kingdom, or I can just buy list it here anyways, whether it's English or Japanese. There's a few stores that don't want English cards, but the majority of them will be willing to take it for the same price usually. So because of this Japan-only demand for Japanese cards, and with the foils being worth more in a pack, Japanese copies of standard cards can actually be cheaper than English cards sometimes. And when there's a difference, it's pretty noticeable when the stores have the English and the Japanese prices next to each other. So there's also just more product opened in Japanese than in English at stores here. And especially with a card like Fatal Push, it might actually be harder to find a regular copy of the card in English. And for cards that are in standard sets that are eternal playable, like Fatal Push, many Japanese legacy players kind of want their decks to be all in English. There's definitely players that I've met that are Japanese that don't want Japanese cards. All their dual lands are in English. All of their Lion's Eye Diamonds are in English. All of their other stuff that they might want is in English, so why should they have this one Japanese card in a deck? More than just, oh, I prefer the English version, it might just be, I prefer to have all my cards be the same language. So I often see standard players, however, with all Japanese cards, because there tend to be newer players, and because they're newer players, they don't know Magic cards as well. In Legacy, it's a lot of the same cards being used, so people know them just from looking at them. They don't really need to read them. But with newer standard sets, you want to be able to read all the new stuff that's coming out. You want your opponent to be able to read the stuff too. And maybe they got them from buying packs, or maybe they bought them from drafts. There's definitely more people that use Japanese cards in Modern and Standard here than in Legacy. So anything from a new set with eternal playability in English can sometimes be worth more here in Japan, which does go against the whole Japanese cards are automatically worth more than English cards. That's an idea that still gets circulated. Some people say Japanese cards are worth more than English cards. They have lists like Russian is number 1, Korean's number 2, Japanese is 3, English is 4, and then the rest of the Western languages are lower in value than English. But the idea that Japanese cards are worth more isn't totally untrue. There are some specific cards that are worth more in Japanese than in English. Off the top of my head, I can say stuff like EMA Force of Will, because that's the only Japanese printing of it, Umezawa's Jite, Lion's Eye Diamond, Flusterstorm, True Name Nemesis, and so on. Cards like that are usually just cards with single printings where the Japanese version is just more rare than the English version. So, let's stick to the topic of pack prices. So if you noticed before, you can rewind the video, I said the words standard packs when referencing the price of packs. This is because the Master Series packs cost more here in Japan than in the States. The prices for MMA packs, Modern Masters, the first one, is about $25 for a pack. But that kind of makes sense. The set is stupid good, and I really do wish it got printed more. MM15, however, packs are still selling close to $15 a pack. And Haruruya in Osaka, they even have a vending machine for packs. And a lot of times when I go, people are just buying random packs of MM15 for $15 or $16, despite the huge amount of bulk rares and the pretty lackluster uncommon selection. And MM15 is strange because it was also printed in English and Japanese. And for the Master Series, for both Modern Masters and EMA, the Japanese packs prices are usually a little higher because there's automatically a foil, and as I said earlier, Japanese foils tend to be worth more. So they tend to be like $1 or so more. But EMA, again, similar deal. Before the second print run was released, prices were hovering around $15 or $16 a pack. Like if you found an EMA pack for $14, then that could be a value. But thanks to the second print run, they finally started dropping to about MSRP. But for a while, it was actually pretty much impossible to find them for a reasonable price. One store after release did a EMA draft, and the rest just took their boxes, cracked it open, and sold them for closer to $20 a pack and made a killing, I'm sure. But this is, I think, because the demand for cards in the master sets are higher than the demand for cards in standard packs. So this leads to cards like Cleeks, Bob, Caracas, Mana Crypt to be a higher price overall. And for some reason, this has kind of nothing to do with the prices, but a note about Japanese packs is the order is reversed in the pack. The first thing you see is the basic land, the token, and then you'll go and see if there's a foil, and then it's the rares, and then it's the uncommons. I'm not really sure why. It's kind of strange that it's different. But if you do buy a Japanese pack and you open it and go, hey, the order's different, this pack has been tampered with, that's not true. That's just how the order of the packs are. Okay, so let's move on to the Zendikar expeditions. In general, they're cheaper in Japan than in the States. They're also cheaper in Europe than in the States from what I hear. I think the US just has a really inflated price on a lot of the expeditions. But the most obvious reason, of course, is the lack of EDH players. It means people aren't trying to pimp out their decks with the expeditions. There's not a ton of people that are trying to foil out their legacy decks or their modern decks with all expeditions. It's too crazy to get 4 copies of Scalding Tarn or 4 copies of Polluted Delta. But just getting that one that you need for EDH is pretty reasonable, I would say. So people who are trying to foil out their legacy or modern decks might use them. There are some people that do use them, but it's just not as common as people who want to get a single copy for EDH. And there are also a few that I do see that are worth more here than in the States, and that tends to be the Blue Fetches, Verdant Catacomb, Eye of Ugin, Wasteland, and maybe there's a couple others. But the latter two, Eye of Ugin and Wasteland, were really expensive when Oath of Gatewatch were released, and they just haven't fallen in price yet. Wasteland was an expedition, and then it got announced that it was getting reprinted in EMA. So for a long time, the players had Wasteland, this foil Wasteland, on such a high pedestal because the only other ones were in English only that were, judge foils. But since Wasteland is getting printed in EMA and it's getting foils, people can just avoid the expeditions and get the EMA foils instead, which caused the price of the Wasteland expedition to drop. But that still hasn't really hit here. Places are still charging closer to $150, $170 for the Expedition Wasteland when it's closer to $100 in the States. And again, that could also just be because if people who pimp out their decks here are in Legacy, good chance they're running Wasteland, but Wasteland isn't as widely used in EDH as it is in Legacy. So let's talk about Kaladesh Inventions. For the most part, they're also cheaper in Japan than they are in the States. The reason is that most of them are just artifacts, which are EDH All-Stars. Chromatic Lantern, Lightning Greaves, Rings of Bright Hearth extra planar lens, scroll rack, etc. Those are cards that are just cheaper in general in the States, so it kind of makes sense that their expeditions are cheaper. Chromatic Lantern, and if you want a Japanese copy, is only $2 or so. Lightning Greaves are about $1. Rings, I see them in discount sections for about 10 to 15. Extra planar lens, $5. Scroll rack, it's close to $30 in the States, and I see them somewhat regularly for less than $15. So it's just things like that. Of course, the expeditions aren't going to be crazily priced when the regular cards aren't. But there are a couple that are more expensive in Japan. I think Chalice of the Void, Engineered Explosives, and Ensnaring Bridge are all just more expensive here. Again, that's because of constructed format playability. And another reason why I think the expeditions and inventions are so cheap is because the packs that they come from are so cheap. When you're paying only $3 for a pack as opposed to $4, the price of the expensive cards is generally going to be less. And it's especially so when the inventions are probably not going to be useful to a lot of the standard players that are cracking packs. You know, what's a guy who plays only standard going to do with an Expedition Meekstone? He's just going to sell it and get what he can for it. You can't really trade in stores here, so it's either keep it in your binder and have it collect dust, or just ship it to the card stores and see what they give you for it. You know, maybe they only give you $10 for it, so sure, I'll take it. That's a few more packs. I might actually pull something I can use, like a Heart of Kiran or something like that. So, inversely, when people are paying $15 for a $10 Modern Master pack, the expensive cards are going to be even more expensive. So, because of that, Tarmogoyfs are still more expensive here than they are in the States. Clique, again, as I said in my last video, just recently dropped to below $40. And Bobs are still really expensive here. Cryptic Command is still pretty expensive. There are exceptions to the rules, especially when it comes to played cards. The price on those can just be extremely cheap. But for the most part, Masters set cards are more expensive. Another interesting thing about the inventions and expeditions is that they're all in English. I do think that if the expeditions and inventions were printed in Japanese as well, that they would actually carry a really high premium. But with all the existing inventions and expeditions in English, it kind of kills this whole Japan-only desirability that some of the Japanese foils carry, and it just becomes about demand for that particular card. So if let's just take Meekstone again, there's practically no demand for it here in Japan, but if it was a Japanese Expedition Meekstone, I'm sure someone would want it. So I'm actually very glad that all the expeditions are in English, because the prices on them would just be insane in Japanese, and I kind of like to avoid overly priced expeditions. And plus, it allows me to kind of compare and get my own expedition at the right price, depending on which one I might want. So that's all I have for today's talk about prices in Japan. So I'm going to reiterate that standard pack prices are actually cheaper in Japan, while master set prices are more expensive. And similarly to the expeditions and inventions, Japanese foils are worth more, but standard Japanese singles are sometimes worth less than their English counterparts. Okay, and again, there's always exceptions to this rule, but from what I've seen, it does happen sometimes. Okay, thanks for watching. You can catch me on Twitter at Osaka Legacy Den. Take it easy.